on the season 9 launch of Rainbow Country, a conversation with openly gay police sergeant, the 2S LGBTQ plus liaison officer for Toronto Police Services, Robert Chevalier. That and more on episode 408. So stay tuned as we kick off season 9 of Rainbow Country.
Hi, I'm writer Adam Smith, author of Deep Sniff, A History of Poppers and Queer Futures. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Sergeant Robert Chevalier, hi, how are you?
Great, happy to be here.
I have to say, thank you for being here to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community and beyond. So thank you for this, especially to talk about you, and you. All things you, Sergeant. Hello. Yes. You are part of Toronto Police Services. You are a police sergeant. You're also part of the LGBT community. You are openly gay. You are the 2S LGBTQ plus liaison officer. Let's start there. Being the liaison officer, what does that mean?
First and foremost, it's about relationship building, internally and externally, and then sort of bridging the two together, right? So I have to focus on my own relationships within the service and then my relationships externally, and then sort of liaising between what's happening internally with the Toronto Police Service and externally with the 2S LGBTQ community. In a nutshell, I know that sounds kind of just like fluff. There's a lot more to it, but in a nutshell, that's essentially what the job entails.
Okay, so let's drill down with that a bit more in regards to what is it that you do to liaise, if that's a word, between Toronto Police Services and the LGBT community. What do you do specifically to help build those bridges and to connect Toronto Police Services to the LGBT community?
So first and foremost, I was lucky because moving into this role, I had some relationships. Like I had done some work with the Pride Internal Support Network of the Toronto Police Service, as well as I was a Church Wellesley neighborhood officer. So obviously working in the Church Wellesley village, I had some connections there. But when I came into the actual role, it was just to really nurture those relationships that I had already established and make some new professional relationships and personal friendships along the way. So we work with many different professional relationships, I call them. So professional relationships with organizations like the 519, ASAP, Friends of Ruby, whether that be the housing or the drop-in for them. Neighborhood associations like the Church Wellesley Neighborhood Association, business improvement areas like the Church Wellesley Business Improvement Area, and then not just focusing on the village because my role does encompass the entire city. So remembering, those outlier organizations like Rex Pride or Two Spirit Persons of the First Nations. As well as organizations like Anishinaabe Health Toronto that have a trans two-spirit program, and other larger organizations like PFLAG or even EGAL and Rainbow Railroad. So making those professional relationships, we're lucky to have a very comprehensive community consultative plan. So we have a community consultative committee made up of 2S LGBTQ. I don't like to use the word leaders, but really that's what they are. They're community leaders. Some of them are, we also have some just well-established and well-connected community members as well. But they come together on an organization. We meet monthly, and we sort of help steer the Toronto Police Services towards equitable policing and making sure that we have an eye on equitable policing. So that's sort of one component, making sure all those and making sure that that community consultative committee is well serviced. So making sure that as a paid employee of the Toronto Police Service, I'm making sure that I can carry out their plans, so to speak, and nurturing those relationships, and then also working on things like our GDTI. So we have a gender diverse trans inclusion project, which also has a community advisory component. So working with the community advisory members of that committee, as well as we have a project, the MMIT, which is the Missing and Missed Implementation Team, which also has a community advisory component. Now I don't deal as hands-on because we have an entire unit that deals with the Missing and Missed Implementation Team, but certainly my role helps support some of those recommendations and some of those relationships. They've reached out to me and our unit, because I say me, but it's actually myself and Constable Cheryl Taylor now. Both of us together are the 2S LGBTQ liaisons. So that's sort of the professional sort of relationships that we manage. And then I talked about personal relationships. So sometimes we have investigators throughout the city who they have, court. They have victims of whatever charges that are going through the court process, and maybe they have a victim that requires just a little bit more explanation, a little bit more coaching or handling to help them through the court process. Especially if that member is a trans or member of the gender nonconforming community, we can lend a hand in that situation. So understanding that, this person could be potentially very marginalized and is facing a lot of discrimination all throughout their life, like even getting on the streetcar to get to court, they could be facing all kinds of discrimination and problems just getting to court. So recognizing that and sort of helping them overcome it, like whether that just be picking people up and making sure they get to court, or phoning them afterwards and asking them how it went, or taking the time to meet with them to describe the entire process and what it typically looks like. We make ourselves available to do that. It is.
You've
It's
got a
pretty
lot
much we don't.
going on.
Yeah, we don't like to say no a lot, right? Like no is not in my vocabulary. It's is there enough time in a day, really? Um, I get emails from all over the city, from officers who shared my contact with people and then reach out to me, or from officers themselves who are reaching out to me like, hey, came across this case, and young person whose family is, doesn't want anything to do with them if they find out that they're gay, or talking about being trans or anything like that, and just doing our best to kind of get that person support and get that person's family support, and make sure that the officers have the appropriate resources to give to people. So, and then that's when we really leverage those professional relationships, because I will often call, individuals from organizations who I know could provide direct support and close to immediate support. So, well, definitely a lot, but it's also fun too. I don't want to make it seem like it's just work, work, work. It's a very rewarding job.
You guys also have things like, meet the police officers on the beat, where you have events at, like, a second cup or something, and members of the community can come in and meet you guys and ask questions, that sort of thing as well, like very grassroots uh, access as well.
Yeah, I think it's very, very important, because we want, there's so many parts. It's so hard. We say like 2S LGBT community, right? As if it's like a person who speaks for the community or something. And it's like we're all over the city. We constantly have people coming from all over all over Ontario, all over Canada, and quite frankly, all over the world coming here, because of and a main driver of that immigration, so to speak, is because of their status as a member of the 2S LGBT community. So because of that, we're busy, and I like to constantly reach people, right? Because I know that there's people who aren't connected with some of these wonderful organizations that I previously mentioned, and they're just getting by, right? Some of them just watch stuff on social media, so we make sure that we have a social media presence, and try to spread things by word of mouth. And I'm glad that you mentioned the sort of grassroots initiatives because you mentioned Coffee with Cops. We also heard in the summertime, it was obviously more busy, but Hanlan's Beach was facing some problems, like with the actual geography of the beach itself is, parts of it are eroding and then causing groups to kind of congregate into smaller and smaller areas. And with that comes conflict. So myself and Cheryl did just a pop-up sort of not on the beach, but sort of on one of the main uh, thoroughfares to get to the beach. Just an anti-hate crime initiative, but also there's always that side piece of this is who we are, and here's some, we always try to have swag and stuff like that
Mhm.
to be as well received as possible when we're doing things. But we do try to do those grassroots initiatives as well when we have time.
And Hanlon's Beach, Hanlon's Point, that's the closing optional beach at Toronto Island, and it's also like officially or unofficially like the gay beach or something in Toronto
Yeah,
here.
absolutely. Learning a little bit more, like working with a group called Friends of Hanlon. They actually are very proud and do a great job. Not unlike many parts of our community, of sort of making sure that we be the curators of our history. And I think they've done a lovely job of even educating me, but other people of the history of the beach. So
Hmm.
letting us know that, hey, this is where gay like pride essentially started
Hmm.
in Toronto, right? Like predating the before the bathhouse raids,
Hmm.
it would have been on the island, right? And
Going
then
back to the
obviously,
the late 60s, 70s.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and even earlier, actually, they've uncounted stuff like I believe I don't want to, you know, if they would be like, no, that's incorrect, but I think it was even earlier than that, like 40s and 50s, which was
Mm.
pretty cool. Yeah.
Okay, so being the 2S LGBTQ plus liaison officer, is this something that's happening? Is this something that's unique to Toronto? Is this happening in other cities across Canada? Can you talk to me about that?
Yep. So the group's actually now expanding to a national scope, but Rebecca Moran from Hamilton Police, she started a really good idea. It was something that I had kind of thought of. So when she took the initiative, I was like, thank you so much, because this was overdue. But essentially wanted to connect all the people who were doing this type of work within police services across Ontario and sort of just connecting us at a once a month meeting just to talk about, like what are you doing for Ida Hobbit? What are you doing for Trans Day of Remembrance? What's working well for you? What isn't? And I really applaud her efforts. And she's actually recently taken it even a step further and tried to add a national scope, which I find is almost eye-opening because it's a big country. There's a lot going on, especially stuff out of Alberta. In Ontario is we have our own stuff, but when we look at that national scope, it's like, wow, this could almost be a full-time job in and of itself, just liaising throughout the entire country. And especially as many of their work overlaps with hate crimes. We're lucky enough in Toronto to have our own hate crime unit within our intelligence unit. But smaller services, it's one person holding multiple portfolios. And so often the LGBTQ liaison officer would certainly look after also that hate crime component as well.
So did this start in Ontario, in Toronto or something?
Okay, so full disclosure,
Mm.
it's never great. Unfortunately, I will say we are starting to do things proactively within the LGBT community, speaking on behalf of the Toronto Police Service as the liaison officer. But traditionally, many of the things that we didn't do it because it was the right thing to do. We did it because it was out of basically a human rights decision, minutes of settlement, or there was like I spoke of the MMIT, we recognized that we weren't dealing with missing people probably as well as we could have been. So Justice Epstein was commissioned to do an independent report, which I'll say it was a pretty scathing report, but pretty fair as well. Came up with a lot of recommendations, but the chief at the time, Chief Raymer, decided to take all of those recommendations. But I say all this to say, generally, we don't do a good job of doing things because it's the right thing to do, and my position is included. So the reason that we have a 2S LGBTQ liaison officer is as a direct result of the Pussy Palace raids.
In
So if you
2000.
Exactly, yes.
Hmm.
So, and obviously, one of the main sort of, in a nutshell, with that raid, we had moved on from raiding bathhouses for things like common body house and keeper of a common body house, and we sort of moved over to looking at Liquor License Act charges, right? And certainly, when you have a female event or a woman's event, which also included trans men and women, come across an old flyer and found that really interesting, and I liked that. But it was a truly a woman's event that was meant to really empower women's sexuality, right? And so you have a women's event, and to send in all men, obviously that's in direct opposition of your Section 2 unreasonable search and seizure, right? So that's an unreasonable search, no doubt about it. And the Ontario Human Rights Commission, you know, upheld that complaint. And so because of that, my position was born. So the 2S LGBTQ liaison, we had to have a liaison officer, as well as started to institute um, training, LGBTQ training for all Toronto police officers. So, which was a good first step, albeit it was mandated, like it was part of a settlement. But that's how my position came about. So it was about just after that, around 2000, 2001, that we had a liaison officer.
Sergeant Robert Chevalier, you are the 2S LGBTQ plus liaison officer. Being the liaison officer, do you help to train new officers, new recruits? Are you involved in that at all?
I'm actually very involved in that.
Mm.
So we came up in the Toronto Police Service. We came up with sort of a four-step um, training program for our new recruits. And actually, I should say not just our new recruits, all members, whether you are a service technician at one of our garages, so the places that work on the vehicles, whether you be an admin clerk, entering things on our computer databases, or you be a frontline officer. Everybody gets some LGBTQ training. So first and foremost, what we do is with the and I'll just because you asked specifically about the recruits, I'll sort of break down their training. So before right when we hire them, they have some training prior to going to the Ontario Police College. So we have them for 90 minutes. And, we have recruits that have fantastic backgrounds from different communities, very diverse communities. Some of them have very little to almost no knowledge of the LGBT community. I mean, they could teach a class on, what it's like to be of Muslim faith and other wonderful things, but they may have had very limited LGBTQ interactions or knowledge. So we sort of start from there and we teach a 90-minute sort of intro class. Then they're on their way. They go off to the Ontario Police College. While they're there, they hear from an officer who has lived experience from the community, and they sort of say what it's like. To have to come out, not just once, but throughout your career as you move into different roles, different places within your service. There's that expected, heteronormative normativity, and that we have to coming out is just not a one-time thing. It's something that we have to continually choose to do, right? And go over things like that sort of lived experience of officers. And then when they come back to Toronto, we do a more comprehensive 3-hour training where we talk about Canadian history. Because I can say that, the 2S LGBTQ community has been systemically discriminated against. But what I like to do is really, you know, outline what exactly that discrimination, or as close to as many different uh, examples of what that discriminations look like. Then I go into language, acronyms, and pronouns, but in more depth. So I talk about acronyms, I talk about language and the importance of language and what research has shown us in terms of the importance of language. And then pronouns. And I've actually learned some wonderful things about language, right? Because of our very diverse class and the way that adult learning works is we kind of learn from each other. And so have learned, like things in Mandarin and Cantonese in the spoken language where they don't have gendered pronouns, right? So sort of use that as a basis. Um, and then from there, we talk about Toronto police specific history with the community. Not a lot of it has been good. So we start with something happened long ago that nobody's heard about, the 1976 kiss-in. Then we move on to the bathhouse raids, the Pussy Palace, the Boyd Kodak decision with the Human Rights Commission, and the GDTI project. Then we get into things like Project Marie Curtis Park and the problems with that. And then we talk about getting removed from Pride, or getting, being removed from uh, police and our vehicles and uniforms being
Mm-hmm.
removed from the Toronto Pride Parade, and what that looks like and how that came to be. My own personal thoughts, and I know that's later in our little chat, so I'll save it. But and then
Is it going to
and
be part of our chat?
I don't know. It was in your notes, I
it's
think.
it's
So
uh, it's like Mark. Are we going to have time?
yeah, I know, right? Yeah, I'm sorry I talk a lot. But there's a lot. There's a lot to it. And then we cover Project Houston, Project Prism, in a fair way. I try to do it as fairly as possible. I mean, obviously, Justice Epstein, I certainly wouldn't, hold a candle to her to
You
her.
you just mentioned Project Prism. What is that?
Okay,
Is
so
does that is
thanks for
that the
asking.
Bruce
Bruce
MacArthur?
MacArthur, yeah. So Project Houston was the original investigation where three men
Mm-hmm.
went missing,
Mm-hmm.
Skanda, Farazi, and you know what? I'm gonna butcher the names, but the first three men went missing.
Mm-hmm.
And then Project Prism was when Salim Essam and Andrew Kinsman went missing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do it in a very fair way that talks about this, and I focus on the systemic issues with it. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
focus on the individual officers and their own
Mm-hmm.
investigative practices.
Mm-hmm.
To be fair to those officers, because I actually have a lot of respect for many of the officers, almost actually all of the officers who were involved in with both of those projects.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then from there, it's a lot of doom and gloom and bad stuff. So I like to sort of call to action. I ended on a good note. So I talk about the things that we're doing now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that, as officers, it's very important. One of their decisions could be one of my slides, right? Like I want to move away from the history that we have, right? And I call it history, but when we're talking about Project Prism and Project Houston, I mean, that didn't come to conclusion until 2021. So it's
Mm-hmm.
even hard to use a word like history when I'm
Mm-hmm.
speaking about 2021.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly don't want to see that. As I'm going to do everything that I can do, and Cheryl's going to do everything that she can do to ensure that we don't find ourselves in that place again with the community, or if we, do, we've built enough leverage and we've built enough. There's enough groundwork there to overcome uh, issues, right, and hopefully catch them early, right,
Mm-hmm.
using our CCC and whatnot. So that is almost the training. So as they graduate, now they actually go into before they take their first radio call. So before they sit in a police car,
Mm-hmm.
and we actually just did this Monday and Tuesday. We take them into the community. So we do this experiential learning
Mm-hmm.
where I do an exercise about talking to people from the trans and gender nonconforming community, as well as when we're talking to somebody and we just don't know what pronouns to use, an appropriate way to introduce yourself. We talk about hooks and triggers with the community and how to, avoid triggers and how to hook people back in to have a successful relationship with them. And then we go out into the community and we do a walk of the Church Wellesley Village. I make sure, the officers from Scarborough and the officers from Etobicoke pay close attention to like the 519, the only community center that we have in the city, and describe to them that, hey, this is like, if you remember nothing else, remember this resource, right? If they don't provide the direct services, they'll know who to direct you to within the community to get that service. So, and then we do a more comprehensive walk with the 51 division officers who actually service that community, and we send them out with if they're available, we send them out with the village officers that actually patrol the village day in and day out. So to make sure we get them a more comprehensive understanding of the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's what, and then from there, it's like, okay, I did my best, good luck. But we're always, and we're also always still here. We're always available, to help things out, like I mentioned, with investigations. We remain available. So
Mm. Wow. Do you enjoy the teaching aspect, uh, the teaching aspect, especially when it comes to, uh, telling people about the LGBT community?
I do enjoy it. I'm certainly passionate about it. There's a lot of misinformation out there,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of things that I felt just weren't getting talked about. Like, why aren't we talking about gay cruising areas? To be honest, when I came into this work and I saw what was happening, and I saw things like the genderbread man and the gender unicorn, and I thought, what the hell is happening? Like, well, what are we doing in an adult education setting? And we're using a fantastic resource for students, right? And that's what that type of material was made for. But where is the adult teaching here? Like we need to have, conversations about a community, a marginalized community that is in real need of equitable policing. And I saw a really big um, missing component of in this education. So I really, and I shouldn't take this, I didn't do this by myself. I'll tell you, I have to give a shout out to Sergeant Henry Dick of 51 Division, who also has a background in teaching and is also very invested in the community as well. So we put our heads together and really tried to come up with um, some really good training, and we didn't also do it on our own. We also involved some community members with lived experience as well. Um, but we really made an updated and in my opinion, good training uh, uh, what do we call it, curriculum, because it was needed. It was really sorely needed. And I'll tell you, other organizations such as the TTC, so they're special constables on the transit community, as well as recently TFS, so Toronto Fire, has also realized that, you know what, we want to get our office or their I don't know if they call them officers, firefighters,
Hmm.
trained in this as well, right?
Hmm.
Gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, that's all part of the Ontario Human Rights Act, and we all, as service providers, have to make sure that we're upholding that internally as well as the service that we're providing to the community. So I sort of like I'll go anywhere to train. I'm all about it. So I do enjoy it. It's
Do you
funny
find it
because
challenging?
it is because I feel like there's a wave, there's like a wave coming at us, right? There's this
Mm.
misinformation. I was, on my phone earlier and trying to update my social media, and then you find yourself, I don't know, I find myself in this, stream of just misinformation, people talking about people identifying as cats and putting litter boxes in schools. And this is the stuff that I actually have to address and talk about in an adult professional setting. And then I make sure that I say how ludicrous that is, right? Like we actually have like the misinformation is and the vitriol is unreal, right? So just trying to make sure that I mention that, right? And I when I'm talking about the acronym, right, I make sure I always make an intentional effort to say, what about somebody who identifies as a cat? Where would that be in the acronym? Right? Like, and I make it clear that when I'm talking about 2S LGBT community, I am talking about sexual orientation and gender identity. Anything
Mm.
else, if whether it be a paraphilia, which is a different topic altogether and it's a different subject altogether, um, is not part of sexual orientation and gender identity, is not
Mm.
part of what I do, right?
Hmm.
And certainly making sure that I educate people on that, right? Like, and also have to say, unfortunately, to this day, there is no children in this province who are going to school and using litter boxes to go to the bathroom. That's not happening. We used to, make fun of these ideas and call them urban legends and understand that they weren't true. But, even today, when we all have the information literally at our fingertips, I still have to come to adult education settings and, fight this misinformation. And it's not just that, it's other things too, right? Like, thankfully, the Ontario government has done a very good job of making public, I'm not even going to call it sex ed, but for people to understand what I'm referencing, I have to say sex ed, but it's actually the health curriculum, right? And it talks about lays it out very transparently what grade one sex ed looks like. And it's not sex ed, it's like health. And it's basically the proper labeling of our body parts. We can't have kids going to school referring to their tata or their boo boos. We need to know that they have breasts, they have a penis, they have a vagina potentially, right? So like depending, obviously. So and having proper words for this, it does two things. One, if the kid becomes injured or ill, they can refer to exactly more specifically what's wrong with them, right? It also, research shows us, makes them um, uh, sort of target hardens them to anything like pedophilia. If a child predator hears a child refer to their breasts or refer to their penis, they might think, "Ooh, that kid's had the conversation with their parents. That kid is gonna, be able to, they're not going to take a shot at that. And they're more likely to go after the child who's referring to themselves, referring to their anatomy, like, in some childish way, like a tata or whatever, right? So very important thing for kids to learn and kids to learn early. And then also just to build on that, it also teaches them the basic principles of hygiene, like washing your hands and the importance to wash your hands. And then that's it. That's what we teach kids in grade 1. Then you move to the grade 2 curriculum. I'm not going to go through it all, but you move to the grade 2 curriculum and sort of building on this idea of hygiene and this idea of anatomy and sort of moving it along, right? So we're certainly not talking about, um, fornication or sexual reproduction at a young age. We get there in the higher grades, but we're starting to build on that, and it's right there for parents or anybody who is interested to see this curriculum on any. It's very easily. You can find it very easy on uh, on the internet, and it's been available since 2019.
Hmm. Wow.
Yeah, so that's some of the stuff I talk about. And it's because we have parents that are getting, misinformed and thinking, "Oh, you're teaching my kids that they're, you're confusing my kids with gender." No, actually, we're doing the opposite, right? Teaching kids to be safe, right?
So how
And
so how, for you as as uh, a police sergeant, part of the Toronto Police Services, uh, being a gay man, on a personal level, how do you deal with things that you're saying, like, misinformation? How do you deal with these things that you see on a day-to-day basis because of your job?
well, so a couple two parts to that. So I always try to challenge, like regardless of where I am, I always respectfully challenge. And I also have understood that that old adage, you get more bees with honey. Really, I
Mm.
want to relate. I want to be able to see where that person's coming from. And it's easy to do. I could see that if a parent is being inundated with this information that their kid is receiving information at school that is going to confuse them about their gender and confuse them about certain things. Or I understand that we have people that have come to this country that think, uh, you know, it is so wrong to be gay, or it is so, and they are okay with people being killed who come out, right? And maybe from their countries of origin, that's an okay practice, right? So I have to, as weird as it is, put myself in their shoes to think, okay, like they weren't born this way, they learned this behavior, right? So I have to meet them where they're at and then try to help to move them along and see that, hey, look, do you like me? What do you think of me? What are your thoughts on me? Right? Well, I'm a member of the community, right? And regardless of what you think of me, I'm here to serve, I'm here to protect. And, if, heaven forbid, I would put my life on the line to protect yours, regardless of who you are. So, I think, and, in my opinion, you can't get much more, like allyship with somebody than that, right? So just kind of coming at it from there, and then personally, I used to think, I grew up and I was gay and I knew I came out at a younger age, and I used to think, I'm pretty discriminated against, and I felt like I had a lot of discrimination. But then when I really started doing this work and learning more about myself and my own social position of power, I thought, you know what? Hold on. Yeah, okay, let's just remove the fact that I'm gay for a second, and let's kind of go around this social position of power wheel, right? I have a good job. I speak English. I have a French last name. Like all these different positions of power. I am able-bodied. I have a good income. I'm married. Just clicking off all of these social positions of power that certainly put me in a powerful place. The only part really that I'm falling into the marginalized aspect is the fact of my sexual orientation. So when I actually look at myself, I think, wow, I have a pretty big opportunity to use my strong social position of power to help be an ally from within the LGBT community and help lift others up. Others who are new to Canada, who are just learning English, who are unemployed right now, receiving social assistance, who have a disability that's going to make it harder for them to enter the workforce. You know, and use my voice to help these other people. So certainly when I hear this misinformation, I use my position in an appropriate way. I certainly don't want to be accused of using it inappropriately, but I use it to do good, and especially for my community.
Well said. Well said. I have literally about a minute left with you, and I hope you'll come back because
I would
there's
love it.
we've just started this conversation and we have to continue and get your thoughts on, like you just mentioned earlier, you know, police not being part of, gay pride in regards to being part of the parade and get your thoughts on that and all this sort of stuff. But right now I just have to say, Sergeant Robert Chevalier, thank you for your time. Thank you for being on the show. I
Thank you very much for
appreciate it.
having me. I've actually really looking forward to this, and it's nice to be able to chat. So thank you.